My name is Kirk Bankside. I own the Minocqua Brewing Company, and these talks that we do on Tuesdays are intended to be very topical, to talk about issues that we're having in the state of Wisconsin or nationally. We try to bring in notable folks from the state of Wisconsin, from Madison and the state of Wisconsin, and I have the pleasure of introducing a friend of mine that we weren't friends in elementary school because he was 2 years older than me, and he was much cooler than me because he was older, and he was friends with my older sister, however, and Jeff Wright came from Sauk Prairie, Wisconsin. He went to Sauk College, then got his PhD at Harvard University. He was a principal in the south side of Chicago for a while, and then went on and is now the superintendent of the Sauk Prairie School District. He was voted the Administrator of the Year, I believe, by the Superintendent's Association, I'm guessing. and most recently, I endorsed, the Minocqua Brewing Company endorsed him for his run for the Superintendent of Public Instruction in the state of Wisconsin. He didn't win that race, but so many people know all the wonderful work that he's doing in the Sauk Prairie area, and he's still a great advocate for public schools, which are having problems in Wisconsin because they're underfunded. And that's what he wanted to fix as the superintendent of public instruction, and that's why I backed him as much as I possibly could. So tonight, Jeff is going to talk about a different issue, which affects all kids in school, all families of kids in school. It's cell phones, and it affects on the development of kids. So without further ado, here is Jeff Wright. It's good to be back with you. Thank you for giving me this time to talk about a topic that is really important to families across the state of Wisconsin. It's important to educators, and what I really want to focus on is the move from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood, and the impact that that's having on even the youngest learners. But I also want to make sure that we make this personal and talk about the impact screen use has on our lives as older learners, as people who still navigate relationships, knowing that a screen potentially is playing a different role than it used to in our lives. And so what I want to do is start. Kirk mentioned that we grew up together in Stevens Point. We lived about a mile apart from each other and went to the same elementary school. I would like you, whether you're at home listening or here in the bar, I want us to talk about what play looked like for us when we were children. I'd like a few stories. And I also want you to think about the first time that you were allowed to leave your house and go further away on your own, or with your siblings, but without an adult, and what that looked like and how far you were able to go. So if I could have some stories from us as a group to start, either what did play look like for you as a kid, or answering that question, when you were first allowed to go further away from your home, where did you go? How far were you allowed to go? With whom did you go when you made this exploration on your own without an adult chaperone?
This helps get to this podcast. All right, I'll talk about the second
Great.
question. So the first time I can remember, I don't know exact ages, but elementary school, probably second, third grade, being able to go to friends' houses. I always rode my bike. So anywhere that you could bike to. Mm-hmm. We lived in a smallish community that was kind of closed off. There was a busy road, so you could only go probably about 2 miles at most. But we had no phones to tell our parents when we'd be home. It was basically come home at dinner time, and you just go to a good friend's house, play with them all day, and eventually show up back at home.
And where did you grow up?
Indiana.
Indiana.
Ogden Dunes, Indiana. Right. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Somebody else. I appreciate it.
Teresa!
Hi, everybody. I'm Teresa. I don't want to pull out that sort of boomer Gen X trope about I'm so short. About how my parents kicked me out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I just came back when I wandered back. But it's kind of true. We were kind of like free range children, I think, back in the day. And with that in mind, I think I too was probably in like second or third grade. There was a bike involved. There was a cornfield involved, all the things in Wisconsin, but just sort of kick us out of the house, no cell phone, come back when you come back. What I want to sort of remark on with that in mind, and it's true, we did drink out of the hose. We all get quoted saying that, we had to drink out of the hose. But thinking about my son is 31 years old, and even thinking about how different his growing up, I think, was, again, it was probably maybe more like fourth or fifth grade, a little bit older on the curve, I think, as is common, but there was a bike involved. There were other kids involved, and that sort of represented his day during the summers as a little kid, or there was a lot of programmed activity. That's something that's different, I think, between my generation and my son's generation is, there was Little League and there was arts and crafts and there were all those sorts of things. And then I felt like he and I and his dad came up together on the electronics. That's a difference that I see is we were all learning it together at that time. Again, he's 31, and which is different now. I think the parents and the children are going to end up at different points with the electronics and with their feelings about it. And the whole digital native versus digital immigrant kind of concept, I think, comes into play to some extent now.
And where did you grow up?
Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Lake Geneva.
Home of Badger High School.
Go Badgers.
Go Badgers.
All right. Thank you.
Who's next?
Yay! So I was going to answer what play looked like when I was a child. Grew up in the 80s. Lots of playing with the neighbor kids. All ages played together. Just met outside. Played baseball, rode bikes. And then, this is very typical, but come home when the street lights come on, and that was about it. Thank
you. You hear similar stories when you talk with people who grew up pre-iPad. That, the amount of time that we are allowed to spend outside, how far we are allowed to go. There were certain signs that let us know when it was time to return home. I remember I grew up I have two siblings that are very close in age to me. And I have three cousins who lived between me and where Kirk lived a mile away. And so the six of us spent a ton of time together. And we could easily bike that distance to go and spend time with our cousins not too far down the road. And there was a trail that was being developed in Stevens Point when we were kids called the Green Circle Trail that now is a very well-established trail that connects the rivers and the parks of the community. But before it was completed, we used to go bike where we thought it was going to someday go. And we would be gone the entire day. And I'm the oldest of the cousins, and so that means that I was bringing kindergartners, first, second graders with me on these all-day bike adventures, trying to figure out where this trail would go. And I know that we snuck over railroad tracks, under railroad bridges, carried our bikes through wetland areas, and we had a shared excuse that if anybody caught us and said we were on the wrong part of the trail, that we were from Illinois visiting for the weekend. But so we have this agreed upon little story. We never were caught. I don't think anybody would have cared. We were kids on bikes exploring the community. And now I think if you look at what's happening in so many communities, we will not trust our children to get on a bike to go to the park less than a mile away, but we will trust them with this screen or an iPad, potentially in a completely dark or alone setting, whether it's in a bed, whether it's in a basement, and they can go so much further away from home with this device than they ever could on that bicycle. And the people that you encounter here, parents don't get to meet as well. And I've said this to parents in the school district where I serve, that I cannot impersonate a 14-year-old girl in the playground, but I can impersonate pretty much anybody on this screen. And why is it that we trust people with this device that gives them access to the world without a lot of training, but we don't trust kids without the training wheels to go a mile away from our home anymore? And so we need to be having conversations as an entire community about what cell phone use and device use looks like for our children, to make sure that it's age appropriate, but it also isn't doing damage to them long term. Some of the things that I want to focus on in particular today that might be surprising is actually to talk about some of the youngest children and the impact of screen use. I think high school kids get a lot of the attention, and the question about whether or not high schools should allow cell phones in classes always becomes a debate or a discussion. We talk less about what's happening with screen use with 2-year-olds and with 3-year-olds and the impact that it's having on them. So that's where I'd like to start. And at some point during this conversation, we're going to turn it on ourselves and talk about our own screen use and when we let our brains rest away from these screens. As Kirk said, I'm a superintendent right now in the Sauk Prairie School District. I've been in that school district for 14 years, 7 as the superintendent. It's a district of about 2,800 students just northwest of Madison. Prior to that, I spent 9 years as a high school principal on the south side of Chicago. It was a fantastic experience, but very different from growing up in Stevens Point. But I'm so grateful for those years. Now in my superintendent role, I get to work with children of all ages. We have a child care center in our district that starts serving kids at 7 weeks of age. And depending on their unique needs, we can serve learners to their last day of their 21st year. And so I get to work with kids of all ages and young adults, and talking with families about the impact of moving from a play-based to a screen-based childhood is personal, it's real. What I want to acknowledge is that parenting is hard. Parenting is a lot of work, and I believe that parents do the best they can. And that often parenting is very isolating, and you feel that you're the only one that's dealing with the challenge in front of you. And it's really hard to create the safe space where you get permission to say to somebody else, are you struggling with this too? One of the collective addictions and collective problems in our society right now is screen use and device use. And I would rather have really open conversation across communities about what we want this to be for our children than make us each make these decisions alone. I'll also say this as a parent of a 7th and a 9th grader, that these are collective experiences. And if my 9th grader has experiences around a device that are fundamentally different from everybody else in the school, it's going to be hard for him to navigate high school. That's my son probably intervening right there. So how do we make sure that we're having conversations as a community so that the ground rules I set in my home can be similar to the ground rules set in other homes of his friends, us together instead of in isolation? So let's start with the youngest kids, and then we'll move to ourselves. Here are some of the things that maybe we haven't thought about before that I want us to think about and discuss today, involving a screen-based childhood versus a play-based childhood. The first is speech development. This is something that we hadn't thought about a lot as a district until the last 2 years, as we've noticed that the demand for speech language services for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds has gone up by over 80%. Our special ed director reached out to other districts to ask, are you seeing these same trends? And the answer was yes, over and over and over again. Now, when I first raised this, and I got to do this with Wisconsin Public Radio, and it'll be airing on Thursday, one of the questions was, is this about the pandemic? These kids weren't born yet. So we can't blame this on masks. What we have seen after the pandemic, though, is our relationship with screens changed, especially in homes where families are working from home, and childcare is difficult when you are trying to do a job at home and there's a 2 or a 3-year-old also in that house. And the more and more time that children are spending on screens during those early years. The American Academy of Pediatrics would suggest that for any child under 2, they should not be on a screen for more than an hour, if at all, and only supervised. So it's a shared experience with an adult or an older child. After 2, it can be an hour a day. So how does this have an effect on speech? I think in the room, it sounds like we have lots of parents, or many of us are parents, and that we probably remember some of the first sounds that our own children made and imitating that sound back and forth, a goo goo gaga or a coo. And they were watching our formation of speech and replicating that back and forth, that mirroring. Children learn that speech through a back and forth interaction. They learn their first vocabulary through that back and forth interaction. You cannot get that through a screen. But you also have a hard time getting that unless you're looking face to face at someone, not face to forehead. And so if I, as the parent, am looking down at my screen and not looking into this young person's face, they're going to have a hard time developing their own speech patterns. Now, I will acknowledge that the need for speech services in our schools has always existed. Somewhere between 7 and 10% of our children will need some sort of speech language support in their early years. That's not new. When I was in elementary school for a while, I got to go see Miss Reinecke, the speech language pathologist, because I didn't open my mouth enough to speak in class. She gave me a big open mouth sticker for my desk, and I haven't stopped talking since. It was a miracle cure. But I needed that support. I was not alone. A lot of students do. What we're seeing now is the increase in the number of students that need that support, and that is directly connected, according to many, many research studies, to an over-reliance on screens and an overuse of screens in these early years. We also learn to play off of screens in a different way than on screens. I want you to think about the first time that you talked about in your stories, the learning how to share, learning how to make your own rules. That's an experience that is different on a screen than in person. We've seen a change in the level of patience with kids. And my bet is that you've seen a change in patience with yourself or with other adults that you share your life. Because a screen is an on-demand instrument, and you can always decide to move on to the next thing. Play didn't look like that when it was a board game, when it was cards, when it was drawing, when it was getting on that bike and biking as far as you needed to get to your friend's house. And so working with students to develop patience, perseverance, resilience is something that more and more schools have to do because they are not learning some of those skills absent a play-based childhood. So one of the articles that I want us to read as a team. Okay, thank you, Kirk. I want to read a section of a book from The Comfort Crisis. I think this is text that's worth having everybody hear, and then I want to talk about a little bit about how we see this in our own lives. And then we can come back to kids as well. The Comfort Crisis was written by Michael Easter. Let me give you a little bit of context about the book. He's basically making the argument that the more comfortable our lives have become, the less happy we've become at the same time. And that we're more quick to complain about everything, the more comfortable life is around us. And he'll point to temperature-controlled residences, restaurants, houses, work, that there was a point where we were not able to control the temperature in our lives. And now if it's outside of like a 4 or 5 degree band, how quick we are to complain about it. So that's one example he uses, but he also talks about being uncomfortable, being in discomfort when we're just alone with our own brains. Instead of being connected to a screen that does not give us the same permission to be alone with our own minds. So I've asked Kirk to help me read some of this. I can read part of it too, and I do have copies because I'm still a teacher first. I think it's helpful when you can see the text yourself, so if you can pass some of those out too.
You should take our cell phones away while we're reading.
I'm not comfortable not listening or talking right now.
So we're going to read a section of The Comfort Crisis. It's a chapter called 11 Hours, 5 Minutes. And at the time, that was the amount of time the average American was giving up to a cell phone per week. My guess is that it's gone up since the writing of this book in 2021. Kirk, take us away.
Okay. Some researchers say addictive is too strong a term for cell phones because the drive to constantly check email and notifications is experienced differently than, say, to drink and drive or take drugs. But a person who knows addiction, I can tell you that the obsessive pull of my pinging phone sometimes feels like the allure of a neon-signed honky-tonk. There's this famous line in recovery, try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. Okay, try to ignore the beeping cell phone. Try to ignore that. Try to ignore more than once. I like the simple definition of addiction being continued use despite adverse consequences, said Brewer. One good sign that I had a drinking problem was that most of my problems were caused by my drinking, and yet I found myself powerless to the pull of barrooms, like this one, for instance. For Brewer, it's no shock that many people are addicted to the slot machines in our pockets, as he called them. Evolution says we should be. But this evolutionary survival process we developed to help us remember where food is so we wouldn't starve, Brewer told me. We'd see food, eat it, and then our stomach would signal to our brain to release a shot of dopamine, a feel-good brain chemical, he said. It's the same chemical that spurts out when people do drugs like cocaine or ecstasy, eat a gluttonous meal, have sex, gamble, or do anything else pleasurable. It's also a three-stepper. There's a trigger, a behavior, and a reward, said Brewer. But this brain process can get hijacked in the modern day. The trigger instead of food is boredom. And the behavior is going on YouTube or checking our newsfeed or Instagram. And that distracts us from the boredom. We become excited and get a hit of dopamine, which is a reward. The paradox is that these mechanisms that help keep us alive are now hurting our health, he explained. We have less tolerance for distress. If we feel something unpleasant, like boredom, typically we would have to just be with that unpleasantness, and then we'd find a productive outlet. But we don't have to do that anymore. We can use our phone to distract ourselves, or as Dankert put it, we simply consume more junk for the mind. Each time we reflexively take out our phone or turn on a computer or TV to kill boredom, it attaches another tiny anchor to our stress tolerance, dragging it lower. Scientists at Oregon State University found that daily stressors like lines and weights can improve our resistance to some brain diseases if we simply suffer through them and shrug them off. More of these everyday stressors are actually better for our brain.
And so I'll continue if you flip over to the other side. Just a quick, thank you, Kirk. So focused mode is a mind at attention. It's on when we're processing outside information, completing a task, checking our cell phone, watching TV, listening to a podcast, having a conversation, or anything else that requires us to attend to the outside world. Unfocused mode is when we're not paying attention. It's inward mind wandering, a rest state that restores and rebuilds the resources needed to work better and more efficiently in the focused state. Time in unfocused mode is critical to get stuff done, to tap into creativity, to process complicated information, and more. The 11 hours and 6 minutes of attention we're handing over to the digital media isn't free. It's all spent in focused mode. Think of this focused state like lifting a weight, and the unfocused state like resting. When we kill boredom by burying our minds in a phone, TV, or computer, our brain is putting forth a shocking amount of effort. Like trying to do rep after rep after rep of an exercise, our attention eventually tires when we overwork it. Modern life overworks the hell out of our brains. Our collective lack of boredom may be causing us to reach a near crisis level of mental fatigue. Research shows that the onslaught of screen-based media has created Americans who are increasingly picky, impatient, distracted, and demanding, as one media analyst put it. These terms fall under the umbrella of insufferable, and overworked, under-maintained minds are linked to depression, life dissatisfaction, the perception that life goes by quicker, and increasingly missing the beauty of life that only presents itself when we allow our minds to wander and be aware of something other than a screen. I thought that he put that so well that I owed it to him to read Michael Easter's words instead of putting that into my own words. But that image at the end of lifting our faces from the screens and seeing the beautiful world in front of us, instead of allowing ourselves to be sucked into that screen over and over and over again, is something that really resonates with me. What I'd like you to think about and share with us, if anybody's willing to come up and talk to us about this, is when do you let your brain get to that unfocused mode? When do you allow yourself away from the screen and other things to let your mind wander in that boredom state, that mind wandering state that used to be so much part of our lives, but is less so all the time with this slot machine in our pocket, as Michael Easter called it. Anybody want to share when they find themselves in that unfocused brain state?
Teresa. Microphone, please.
Welcome back, Teresa.
So I was told by an onlooker that they could not hear me, and I blamed my short stature. Are we good? So as you're saying this, it's kind of creeping me out because I'm thinking through my day. And the first thing I thought was, does doing the Wordle count? Because I mean, no, that's probably not unfocused, right?
No.
But like, so I'm thinking it in the morning, you know, I wake up and I guess I'm unfocused while I'm feeding my pets for a few minutes and maybe eating my breakfast. But then I'm like, got to do my puzzles, right? Do my Wordle, do my connections. And then, you know, I was in my career working from home. So that was a different screen. Now I'm doing a little of this, little of that for Kirk. And so that's a couple of screens. And then I got to go check my Facebook and then I got to turn on MSNBC and see what hell another day has wrought. And then if I go to the post office or Walgreens, that's unfocused.
Do you get your phone out when you're waiting in the line in either of those places?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Remember when you didn't? Like in the
Yeah, I mean,
past?
sort of.
Yeah.
But like, even so sometimes I'm behind the bar here, like more toward the evening. But I'm doing a little work stuff on my phone. I'm checking my social media. I'm telling my friends, hey, come on, get down here. You know, but I guess, Scott, when I'm cleaning the bathroom or something, that's unfocused. Except I do clean the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like, it's not totally unfocused. But
it may be the most
Jeff.
unfocused time of your day is when you're doing a chore where you literally can't have a phone in your hand.
I think that's right. And now I'm nervous.
And Michael Easter's line was that modern life works the hell out of our brains, that you very rarely give your brain downtime that used to be part of the routine of our days.
Well, before I go to bed at night, I'm usually laying in my bed playing Scrabble with my phone, which sometimes has a real person on the other end of it. And sometimes it's Zoe, she's computer generated Scrabble opponent. Okay,
Yes,
thanks,
so we
Jeff.
need to talk.
Detox for me.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else want to talk about when they find themselves in unfocused mode? What I'm learning so far is that it's hard to identify that time. All right. And that I think that there are children who are incredibly young that are probably also would struggle to find an answer to that question, except for in the structured activities like we talked about a little bit, like your son's generation, when playing soccer, when going to show choir, when going to this activity.
Have you met him?
What's your answer?
I mean, I try to be a little bit better about it,
Good.
but I'm sure I'm also not great. Like before bed, I always, at least an hour or so before bed, don't check text messages, don't read email, like keep my phone away from me. I will read a book, which I guess is somewhat focused, but
But your brain is in control of that situation
Yes.
as opposed to what the screen
not
is
looking at
telling
a
you.
screen.
Correct.
Or I'll talk to my husband because we have kids and we have an hour before bed where we can actually communicate without kids around. When I drive to work, I'll listen to the radio, but that's usually about it. I don't know. When I get home from work, I usually keep my phone away for at least an hour or so to kind of talk to my kids, see what they were doing that day, hang out with them before we have activities going on. But a lot of it is,
Thank you.
At work and that
Yeah.
sort of stuff.
But thank you for processing your day for us. And
Yeah.
you clearly have set some boundaries for certain times when the screen is away. And there's a lot of research about that hour before sleep, that we do sleep better when we have not been looking into that screen within an hour of going to bed. But it's really, really difficult for us to set that boundary. I think that's where a collective answer as a community, if I could get all of the friends in my son and daughter's friend groups, if I could get all of their parents to agree that the phones turn off at 8 p.m. or whatever boundary we want to set as a community, how much easier it would be for me then to say to my kid, that means for this last hour of the day, we're playing a game as a family, we're reading in our beds, we're talking, but we're not looking at the screen, and no one else is trying to reach you right now anyway, because we agreed we're turning them off so that your brain can start to wander and start to rest and then start to sleep. Anybody else want to share about their own unfocused time? Kirk? Yes, Scott?
I was saying I had 0.
Okay, Scott at the bar has 0. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have made a living on making T-shirts that are snarky, and or beer labels that are snarky. So I have found that if I am on my screen or I am working, I can't be creative. So in order to actually run this company, I go on walks, or I used to go jogging, and now my Achilles don't work anymore. But I go on long walks just to be creative, to think about how to sell stuff. So I have to have an unfocused brain. So it's amazing that you say that, but that's in order to be creative, you can't be focused.
And thank you for that example. And for me, Kirk, it's very similar. When I go on a run, I don't bring headphones. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not listening to music. I'm listening to my own brain and trying to figure out what did I need to work through that maybe I didn't even know I needed to work through until I hit that blacktop at the end of our driveway. We live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and I just get to run and think. The other place for me is my lawnmower. All of my graduation speeches were written on a lawnmower because it was some point thinking about that graduating class while riding that stripe back and forth without needing a lot of focus, just enough that some story from that class's journey or some message that I wanted them to hear popped into my head that it never would have had I been trying to work on this through my phone, or if I was sitting at my office desk, struggling to come up with the idea. So I come up with the idea, I run back into the house, I jot it down and can put the thoughts in a more orderly way at my desk later on. But I know that personally, I have to find that deliberate pause to allow myself to think. And it sounds like you have to do the same thing to run the company, which I'm sure there are people who think it's only by looking at the news that you think of the snarky remarks. It's later on when you get to process the news that you come up with those snarky remarks that you bombard to us on email and social media. Thank you, Mr. Kirk. So there was a book that came out last summer, last school year, that got a lot of attention talking about the impact on our children and screen use. And this is more geared toward middle school and high school age children, but it's called The Anxious Generation. I'm seeing some nods that some of you have seen this or read parts of it. And I think that there was some criticism about some of the research that Jonathan Haidt used at the start of the book around issues of mental health and whether or not he was cherry picking data points. What I'd like to suggest to anybody who would like to read this is let yourself get past the specific argument of every single data chart and ask questions about the overall themes you're seeing in the lived experiences of our kids that he's describing. And later on, I'm going to talk about some of his recommendations for our schools and for our families and see if we agree with some of his recommendations. But some of the things that he highlights in the books, in this book, are the things that our students are deprived of, or our children are deprived of, because of the screen-based or phone-based childhood. Or to connect it to Mr. Easter's work, that when we don't have time for our unfocused brain to be creative, to remind us of how to be patient, to kind of have that mind-wandering time, some of the things that are stolen from us. Social deprivation is one of the key things that Jonathan Haidt highlights as something that our students, a reality of our children in the modern age, that children need face-to-face, synchronous, embodied physical play. It's painful to be ignored, and you're never as important as the people that are on the screen. You're also, as a child in a home with screen-addicted parents, can pick up the message that I'm also not as important as what's on your screen. Because no matter what I do to get your attention, Mom, or whatever I do to get your attention, Dad, that screen seems to always be more important. One of the hard questions that I've asked some parents to consider is that if your child were to draw you, draw your dad, draw your mom, would the child's picture be with you and your phone? Would the child's picture of you be you looking down at your phone and not playing or doing something else that would have been central to that picture had it been drawn a generation before? There is social deprivation when we focus more on what's happening on that screen and less with what's happening with the beautiful people right in front of us. We brought up already sleep deprivation, and we learned of somebody who has really good boundaries, and we learned of people potentially in the room, and maybe myself included at times, who don't have good boundaries about this. But we know that children need more sleep than adults do. And some of them, especially in their teenage years, really struggle to get to sleep. They're going to struggle even more if this phone is in front of them. I maintain an Instagram account as superintendent in my district. It's Souped Jeff. And I love the fact that I get to tell the story of our school district through my eyes as somebody who gets to go into any classroom, into any experience all of the time, and tell the story of our district. I have a lot of students who follow that account as kind of part of the newspaper of the community. I love that part. I love their interaction with me, and sometimes when they prod me to call snow days in the middle of the winter through my Instagram account. What I don't love is when I see them liking my posts at 3 a.m. on a school day. Because I know that means that I'm not the only one that they're engaging with at 3 in the morning with a device probably in a bed, and it's not making it possible for them to sleep. This is having a real cost. We live in a 2-story old farmhouse. The phones stay downstairs where they're plugged in, and they don't go upstairs to where the bedrooms are. That's one of the rules that we set so that we would not have a temptation that if something was buzzing or something was potentially attracting me back to that device while I'm supposed to be sleeping, that our kids won't be getting a good night's sleep. So they go upstairs and they read good old books until they fall asleep and aren't tempted to check in on the social interactions with their friends and their classmates. The last deprivation or issue that Jonathan Haidt suggests is attention fragmentation. And this goes back again to this question of the unfocused brain. That what we were doing a survey of our community in our school district recently, and while working with the company that was helping us write the survey, they told us how many words the average American will read before going back to check in on their phone. And it's a really startlingly low number of that. If the survey was to be more than like 2 pages, you may not get them to ever come back to read the 3rd page because 2 pages in, I have to take a phone break. So that attention fragmentation, you can imagine how much harder it is than when they get to class, when they get to a job, if that's the way that their brain is being set up. So I want to look at Jonathan Haidt's suggestions for how we could do this differently. And I'm not giving these to you as saying that this is the absolute answer, but I do want us to discuss a little bit about whether or not we think these would be the answer. And if our communities where we live and we share the job of raising children, would these be reasonable boundaries to set? So if I can have somebody pass those out, I will read them to our at-home audience. That's all right, Kirk. This is my question I put on the top. What do you think? Again, I'm not saying that this is the ultimate answer. I'm just suggesting that this is a great place for us to start this conversation. Jonathan Haidt suggests no smartphones before high school. Parents should delay children's entry into round-the-clock internet access by giving only basic phones with limited apps and no internet browser. Limited Apple. That was maybe a slip in my own world there. No internet browser before 9th grade, or roughly age 14. No social media before 16. Let kids get through the most vulnerable period of brain development before connecting them to a fire hose of social comparison and algorithmically chosen influencers. The third thing that he asks for is phone-free schools. He says in all schools from elementary through high school, students should store their phones, smartwatches, and any other personal devices that can send or receive text in phone lockers or locked pouches during the school day. That is the only way to free up their attention for each other and their teachers. And then the fourth thing that connects to my first question of the night, far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. That's the way children develop naturally, their social skills, they overcome anxiety, and become self-governing young adults. So this is Jonathan Haight's suggestion. I would suggest, as a parent of a 7th and 9th grader, it is really difficult to do any of these things on your own. So you'd have to find ways to get a community to collectively address this shared addiction and the shared way that our children are experiencing school and these early years of life. I'm just wondering if anybody wants to come to the microphone and offer their opinion on any one of these 4 recommendations on whether or not no smartphones before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools, and more independent play. Thank you.
All right. I will say I pretty much agree with every single one of these. No smartphones before high school, like maybe 8th grade. That's what I've kind of told my child is wait till about 8th grade. You can have some sort of phone where you can call people or text your friends. There'll be rules about not having it before bedtime, not having it at school, that sort of stuff. But I don't think kids should be freely able to search the internet. I think that, that age of kid doesn't know what they're looking at. They can look at bad things and not even know. No social media. I agree with, there's really no need for it. Phone-free schools, we were just talking about that on the way over here, how we kind of wish that at the middle school age, at least, they would take phones away, at school, because it's only a distraction, really. There's no need for them. And I agree with letting kids play more.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to what was pretty much a thumbs up to these recommendations? Or anybody want to disagree?
I would like to comment.
Okay, yeah, we're ready for you.
Here comes the short lady again. So what strikes me about this is I spent a career working with people in poverty. And so it strikes me that a lot of this is great. I don't disagree really with any of it, but it's probably harder to implement. Perhaps, let's say mom's working 2 jobs and kids are home unattended, things like that. And then number 4, especially far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. I think that's hard, depending on where you live and how you live and who lives around you. So just wondering, I guess, what your thoughts are about that. And if you've put that into play. I know there's only so much the school can do, right? But for some of us, this could be easier than others. For example, you're talking about a model where you can get buy-in from your children's friends' parents. What if you don't know who they are? That type of thing. So that just strikes me wondering what your thoughts are.
Those are great points. What we've decided as a school district is that there's only so much that we can control. And I don't want to make any assumptions about how you live your life or what you could do or couldn't do with your children. But what I can control is what their lived experience is when I get to be your partner as their educator, their teacher, their educational assistant, their superintendent, their principal. And so what do we do between that 7:30 and 3:30 or whatever time it is that we get them? And so in our district, especially at the elementary level, we've decided to make school pretty screen-free, knowing that their children have access to screens quite a bit outside of school, and that when we choose to use them in our schools, it's a deliberate decision and not a default decision. And I think that there was a temptation for a while that if you finish your homework or if you finish your assignment, then you get to go play with the iPad. And so what I learned as a student is do this other stuff as quickly as possible so I get the reward of screen time. Screen time is the prize. No, play is the prize. More conversation with your teacher and your classmates. Like that's the prize. And save the screen time. If you're only supposed to have an hour of screen time a day, put that in some other part of the day when you aren't with like-age peers at home. Potentially with no siblings, potentially with 1 or 2, potentially with ages that are very scattered in a household. We don't know that. But I do know that for a few hours a day, I get children who are now with like-age peers in the same space, and we can put the screens aside and bring back play. I was asked a few years ago by a company that wanted to sell me an iPad for every 4-year-old. I said, there's not a chance. And this person got really snarky with me. Thank you for reminding me of that word, Kirk. And was really frustrated that I wasn't like riding the tech wave and was going to give every 4K kid, 4-year-old, an iPad, and said, what would you buy? And I said I would buy fake kitchens and costumes. Like, what are the things that we used to play with in kindergarten classrooms, in first and second grade classrooms? Some kids have these things in their homes or in their basements. Not all kids do, but we can make sure school does. We also have really focused on making outdoor education a larger part of the child experience in our district. We have a school that's out in the country that the first and second graders spend a full day every week, all school year long, fully outside. It's an adjacent farm and hunting property. The family has said you're welcome to use it. In the middle of the winter, these children are spending the entire day learning math and science, reading social studies, outside with their peers in the natural environment, and watching how the same piece of earth changes throughout the year. And so as they are changing as learners, they're watching the earth change too. The only time we stop is lightning and thunder. Otherwise, what we try to teach these children is that there's so much to learn from get your head off the screen and see all the world in front of you, and that I can teach you so many of the common standards that we've agreed every first grader needs to know outside and through play and exploration, not just in a classroom. Now, not everybody can do that, but I would argue that there is a way to get outside in every environment and see how the world changes around us while we are changing as learners and getting our head off the screen to see what's out in front of us. So I think your question, your main point was that these expectations that Jonathan Haidt suggested to us may not be possible in every home. But I do think that we can create some common expectations about what school looks like and make it as play-based as possible. Now, I think an obvious question is then what about middle school and high school? Well, what is play for grown-ups? It's conversation. That's how we play. We also go and play sports and pickleball or music or things like that, or go to a concert. But a lot of times we sit around a table with friends and share stories and talk and debate and argue. How do we make sure that high school and middle school involves as much of that collaborative thinking face to face and not screen to face as possible as part of their experience and education, and save the screen time for other time? That's how we've chosen to do it in Sauk Prairie, acknowledging that we can't make a universal declaration on what cell phone timing is going to look like. But that is one of the questions that I want to leave you with today, is what role should a school, a parent group, the medical community, the clergy, civic organizations, what role together should we have in collectively addressing this collective problem? Because I believe we do have a responsibility to step into that space. I don't think that it's fair to parents to say you are completely on your own to try to navigate a screen world. If you have a child that doesn't have a screen, but everybody else in the class does, that's really difficult. So could we have conversations with families as young as second grade and agreeing when does it make sense for most of our children to get cell phones that have internet capacity? That doesn't mean that they can't have a watch that lets you track where they are and send a few simple messages. Like, there are ways that you can still keep in contact with your children without giving them access to Snapchat or TikTok or the internet. Do we step into that space as a community and say, you know what we want for kids in Wisconsin? We want kids in Wisconsin to grow up in a play-based environment, not a screen-based environment. I think the school does have a role in that. And as a school district that recently chose to open up a child care center for 168 little bitty kids, I think we're positioned to start some of this conversation and ask families with the absolute youngest children in our community, what could we be doing as partners to make sure that childhood is play-based instead of screen-based? So my hope is that tonight, not only did you think about the impact on speech and language development for our youngest learners, or their ability to grow in their patience and perseverance, but that you also had a few moments where you thought about your own relationship with your smartphone. And that if you do nothing else as a result of this conversation, that you make sure that every single day there's at least 15 minutes minimum where you let your unfocused brain be creative without a screen, that you make sure that there's time in a day, whether it's behind a windshield of a car or sitting quietly in a line or sitting in your living room, that you give yourself permission to not look at a screen and instead be surprised and sometimes startled by what your brain remembered or was coming up with or creating because you let your unfocused brain rule the day. Thank you for being part of this conversation and for helping us transform what childhood looks like in Wisconsin. It's been a pleasure being with you this evening. Thanks. Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you, Jeff Wright. Give another great hand for Jeff Wright, Administrator of the Year at some year, and somebody who we hope to see a lot more from. He's got so much to give to Wisconsin, and Sauk Prairie shouldn't have all of him. So thanks again, Jeff. Appreciate it. All right, and then this is yet again the Taproom Talk. Next week we have Teresa. Chris Walker, who's a journalist in Madison, who's going to talk, Truth Out, and he's going to be here same time, same place, 7 o'clock. He's going to be taking questions, and he writes about politics all the time in Wisconsin. So thanks again for everybody for tuning in on Substack, YouTube, Facebook, and here at the Taproom. Take care. Bye.
I've never seen with that. Can I please acknowledge that was one of the most awkward distance things I've ever had to do. I would rather have been sitting right here with you. I used to be in a place before I realized where I am, but
I'm just having capacity to do that, to show you and then show us, because we haven't had that, so it's fine. They'll make you